I'm Mark Bruzonsky, and thank you for tuning in to Mideast Realities. We're in Cairo, Egypt, the largest of the Arab countries, the first Arab country to make peace with Israel, and in many ways the most important of the Arab countries, not in terms of oil wealth or petrodollars, but in terms of size, population, economy, and political impact. We're in fact on the rooftop garden of the Carlton Hotel, right in the middle of downtown Cairo. A hotel I first came to in 1971. I was a student at the time, representing the international student movement for the United Nations at the United Nations while going to law school. I was invited by the UN Association of Egypt, which had its offices across the street, and I was taken to this hotel. A very small, very well-kept Egyptian hotel with this lovely rooftop terrace, especially in the summer months. But we're here to discuss the situation in the Arab world with Mohammed Sid Ahmed. Mohammed's one of the best-known political analysts here in the Middle East, throughout the Middle East, not just in Egypt. And he's an old friend of mine. In fact, I met him in 1978, the second time I came to Cairo. At that time, I was a young journalist. I had just published a book for Congressional Quarterly called The U.S., Israel, Oil, and the Middle East. And I was invited by the Egyptian government to spend 3 weeks here in Egypt. It was just before the political events that shocked this region. It was in the months before Anwar Sadat's trip to Jerusalem. And in fact, I played a very small footnote role in history at that time. Through a variety of circumstances, I ended up meeting with President Sadat privately, arranging for him to send a telegram to a conference I was about to attend in Israel. At the time, it was unheard of, the idea that an Arab leader from an Arab country would be sending a telegram to anybody in Israel. And it was the days before, in fact, he had decided to go there. It was some days later that he decided. Anyway, I left the next day after meeting with him, was on a plane to Athens to connect to Israel, woke up with an English language paper on my lap and a picture of the President of Egypt and myself on the very top of the paper staring at me. So it was a small footnote in the history of this region. Of course, things have now happened. Political agreements, wars, the destruction of Lebanon, destruction of Iraq, revolutions in Sudan, in Algeria, great tension here in Egypt. But nevertheless, it's good to be back. I've probably been here 100 times since the 70s, and we'll be joined in just a few moments by Mohammed Sid Ahmed, one of the best-known commentators on the political affairs of this region, and we'll discuss with him the history of what's been happening, the political agreements, the peace process, the situation with Israel and Egypt, Israel and the Palestinians. Thank you again for tuning in to Mideast Realities, and I hope you'll be tuning in every week at this time on this channel, this day of the week, for Mideast Realities. Is what you're saying that these political agreements with the Israelis and with the Americans, the war against Iraq, that all of this has humiliated many people in this part of the world, made them ashamed of their own governments, ashamed of what's happened to them, and the reaction in some cases takes the form of Islamic nationalism.
Yes, if you like. I mean, what is actually happening now, the peace has not created what the objective of peace was. It is not a situation where everybody gets something out. It is not an improved situation for everybody. It's an improved situation for Israel. It is perhaps not all Israelis are aware of it. There are critics of the peace process in Israel itself, but grosso modo, Israel now has linkages with most of Arab countries. It's no longer in a Middle East ghetto. It is just the opposite. It is today, it could project the image that it has never been as victorious as it has become. The Arabs are told that they're not defeated, but they feel that they are. It is only those with vested interests in projecting the image that they are not defeated that would say so. Disheartened people throughout society will talk of defeat rather than of a situation that one should look forward to and believe that it will that all the sufferings of the area will be overcome in the close future. That's where we stand today.
Are you saying that the guns are possibly only temporarily silenced?
No, I don't say that. I don't think the guns it will not be state guns anymore. This is over, this game. I don't see ourselves going back to that. But we'll have all sorts of things simultaneously. It's finished, the war of blocks. It won't be one block against another block. This is finished. But what we will have is the reasons that brought about war between blocks will express themselves otherwise. There will be a lot of intercourse. There will be business people working on either side together, but there will also be groups that will stand up to it. There will be terrorism. There will be also very daring forms of terrorism that we will have simultaneously forms of intercourse and extreme forms of conflict side by side.
But wouldn't that potentially change if, in fact, some of the regimes changed? Are you suggesting the regimes in place are simply going to stay there?
No, I believe that not everything is going to change. When Israel came into being in 1948, all Arab regimes in its vicinity changed. I expect that when peace will be installed, all Arab regimes will change once again. To cite only some cases, many of the Arab regimes were issued out of military takeovers, because justified by the need to confront Israel militarily. Israel will never tolerate any regimes of military origin to live on in the Arab world in a situation attributed to peace. So one must expect, with much American intervention, I would assume, that things will change drastically with the Arab world throughout the future. Also, the Gulf War has exposed that it was not only Iraq that was defeated, but most of the Gulf states as well. Their vulnerability was exposed as never before.
So, and their reliance on the Americans to keep themselves in power was
not
exposed.
Only Americans. I mean, they would have not even wanted Arab military regimes to keep them in power. They don't want even regimes that are attributed to a history of military takeovers to remain in power, because these states are still not military regimes. They are tribal regimes.
But I'm trying to sort of cut through this and understand where your analysis takes us. So that's especially why I'm leading in this discussion. Are you saying that if in fact this isn't a real peace with the Palestinians, and that it doesn't look like it is, it looks like an imposed settlement in which they are given ghettos and Bantustans and reservations to live on, and the Israelis win? If that's what it is, as each year makes that more clear,
there will be no peace.
Isn't there going to be more of a sense of we've been had, more of a sense of humiliation,
of course,
more of a sense of alienation?
There will be texts that will be attributed to the name of peace. Agreements for whatever the signatures of this agreement, what worth these signatures could have, that will exist. There will be business communities interested in hoping to get doors open in the Western America thanks to the Israelis, and Israelis taking advantage of this. That will be the forces attributed to peace. But there will be also, against that, a wide range of opposition forces becoming more assertive than ever.
Even here in Egypt, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the press, most of the intellectuals still refuse to meet in Egypt with Israeli delegations.
Yes.
You refuse, I believe.
Yes. So far, in Egypt, all Israeli delegations are boycotted, are not met by Egyptians.
So while the governments have made accommodations, and the foreign minister meets, you intellectuals, you press people, you journalists, you don't meet.
Yes, but at this juncture, the frustration that is widespread has even reached to a certain extent, even the regimes. I mean, this recent meeting between Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Mubarak.
Here a few days ago.
In Cairo. 1 week after Weizmann's visit to Cairo.
Yes.
It's very significant. Weizmann came with an ultimatum in a way.
An ultimatum?
An Israeli ultimatum.
That Mubarak must come to Israel.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when the president comes, the response is that the president here goes there. He had never been before. When Rabin comes, when Perez comes, it's not necessary. I mean, in protocol terms. But it's signaling
let's make this clear for Americans. Weizmann, as the president of Israel, came here many times previous, but never as the president of
That's
Israel.
right. It is
Now
the
he came as the president
first
of
time.
Israel,
And when he comes as the president, the Egyptian president should reciprocate.
Right.
That is the protocol. And it's a way to say you can't anymore pretend that you don't want to come. You have received me, you have to reciprocate. Okay.
Okay.
Now, under this was how come that you go and see and meet this terrorist called Gaddafi, and you don't come to the symbols of peace in Israel? So you have to make a choice. If you're for peace and against terrorism. Exactly like Arafat should be for dealing with Israel and for standing up against Hamas, because Hamas is identified with
okay,
terrorism.
and then the Arabs hold a summit,
Yes.
and the purpose
And-
of that summit is to say to Mubarak, don't go to Israel.
No, before even that, Mubarak himself fixed an appointment and then accepted the principle of going, but did not fix an appointment. And it was obvious that the meeting was tense. And 1 week after, we have this meeting in Cairo, where Saudi Arabia is able to say, in its own language, in its own terms, that now all these states around me have now come to see, the Gulf oil states, that Israel eventually could be more useful than Saudi Arabia, and as such are building up the connections. That Syria is left out of the cold because no agreement has been achieved so far, and that Egypt is questioning whether it has the central role it had previously.
Are you suggesting that the arrangements that have been made are not nearly as stable and not nearly as lasting, for instance, as the Americans seem to suggest they are?
No, I would put it, I won't go that far, but what I would say is the following, that the Americans believe that the time has come to make out of peace the frame of reference, and everything that stands up still to peace as the small writing that will be overcome eventually. It's just details. The situation is not at all that. What we actually have today is that if things continue the way they are, we will not have peace at all. We will eventually have things signed on paper here and there, but the relevance of which, when it comes to the behavior of societies throughout the region, the politics of the region, will have nothing to do with what have been said.
All right, I have to pick up on that. You say, if things continue the way they are,
Yes.
which to my mind is the most likely outcome. There are reasons that things are the way they are, very deep reasons, very historical reasons. If things continue the way they are, you say we won't have peace at all, except on paper.
Yes.
Well, what will we have?
We will have you see, the problem is we will have a lot of breakdowns throughout the society. We'll have a very critical period for a long time to come, but we will have the expression, perhaps not in legitimate form, perhaps not in what the people in the developed world would like this region to be, saying that we can't be taken for granted, that we can't be treated this way.
So what are you going to do about it?
This is a movement that should, at the time, well, that is the movement of the identity of the region.
Basically, what the West wants from you is, we buy your oil cheaply, we sell you military goods, sometimes expensively, and we basically want you to be quiet and buy a lot of our things, all the way from satellite television to Coca-Cola to McDonald's hamburgers, which wasn't here a few years ago when, we're satisfied with the situation. If a few of you kill each other, if there's a little terrorism now and then, that isn't going to affect us all that much, is it?
No.
The Israelis are the nuclear power here. The Israelis,
Yes,
4 million Jews, are in fact the superpower of the Arab world, aren't they?
Look, I'll tell you something. You can't cheat with history.
You can't cheat with history.
With history. In a certain way, when we compare what happened after World War II, Germany and Japan were defeated, and it was acknowledged that they had been defeated. This has made out of them today the two most powerful states on earth. Russia in World War III was described as not having been defeated, and it is the best way to keep it defeated. I think that what is happening now is that the Arabs are being told that they have not been defeated, while they really have been defeated. Now, you can't play that game indefinitely. What is now happening in the region is to say that you can't put the name peace onto something that doesn't have that meaning at all. So sooner or later, things will have to be rectified somehow. The people will take it in charge to have it rectified somehow.
And yet when I ask you, are you suggesting the guns are only temporarily silent?
Yes, but it will not...
You said no.
No.
They are permanently silent.
Yes, permanently silent as guns of armies. I don't think the future game will be through armies. It will be otherwise. It will be another form of I don't think that the previous polarized game will repeat itself. Conflict will continue, polarization will continue, bipolarity in this meaning, a north-south confrontation will continue. Bridging this in the name of peace does not have the requisites for it to happen, but it will not be along the rules of the game as they have been before.
The guns you speak of, in many ways, have turned inward. Since the Camp David agreement, Lebanon was destroyed.
Yes, that's one expression.
Iraq was destroyed.
Yes.
Algeria is in the throes of revolution.
Yes.
Sudan had a revolution. Egypt has the kind of security and tension that was never here in the early years when you and I met.
Yes.
So is that what you're suggesting, that
In
the
a
guns
way.
have turned sort of inward?
Yes, but perhaps that, perhaps other forms, I do not know, it's difficult to predict. But what I want to say is that that's what I meant when I said a moment, there has been a displacement of the contradictions. It's no longer between Israelis and Arab regimes and Arab states as it had been. It's moved elsewhere, into the Arab world itself. Israel has manipulated that. Arab regimes have played the game with Israel there. Israel projected at the beginning the image that there is a symmetry. We have a problem inside our society, you have a problem within your society. Actually, Israel is much better placed than any Arab state to use its exploitation of inter-Arab rifts and conflicts to overcome its own. So in a certain way, that's what I mean, but one party is the victor and the other party is only told that it's the victor, the best way to have it give in.
There's one other subject that you have written about and which we haven't discussed, and that is the fact that the only power with weapons of mass destruction in this part of the world is in fact Israel. That every other country that has attempted to develop weapons of mass destruction, primarily Iraq, have been prevented from doing so. In fact, I would suggest to you that the destruction of Iraq had a lot to do not just with Kuwait, which seemed to be something the Americans manipulated, the tension between Iraq and Kuwait. But the Israelis and the Americans were quite nervous that the Iraqis had weapons of mass destruction and a program of further development of further weapons of mass destruction, and that was something that they found intolerable and had to find one way or another to prevent.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. You see, it's more of an Israeli concern than an American concern, this dimension of Iraq. The most important dimension of Iraq when it comes to America is threatening the stability and the American hegemony over the oil area. But it is a fact that today Israel is the only nuclear power in the area, and that peace is being related to the idea that Israel is entitled to have its cake and eat it, to have the peace and to have the weaponry of the war, and to have both on its terms. Now this is a thing that will even Arab regimes who would feel themselves totally committed or related or dependent upon this process cannot accept.
Well, your government, to my surprise, actually stood up on the issue of nuclear weapons.
No, it's escalated it.
Yes, and has said they will not sign.
Before it was the chemical against the nuclear, now it's the nuclear against the nuclear.
Right.
So this is an escalation of the issue.
But surely Egypt is not developing nuclear weapons. First of all, the Americans would not allow it.
Of course. But when this is a stand, when you encourage Arab states not to sign, when you take the lead in not signing such agreements, this creates a situation where others who would pull out their necks to get nuclear weapons one way or another, and there are many candidates for that throughout the region, and the facilities of doing it has become easier than ever because today nuclear technology is all over the place. There is a big market for nuclear technology in a country who would sell anything, that's Russia, and the countries that still have Russian nuclear devices. So therefore, the attempt at Israel's attempt at keeping at having this monopoly over nuclear weapons alone is actually inciting the whole area into becoming a nuclear area.
Are you saying there's a nuclear arms race underway in the Middle East, even though it's not much talked about?
Yes, I think that if Israel is going to stick to the stand it has, there will be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Because it will not be as easy as before for Iraq to do what it did with Iraq when it hit Iraq's nuclear installations about 10 years ago. It is not, or 13 and 14 years ago. It is no longer as easy as it was before. And therefore, if Israel is going to stick to the idea that our nuclear weaponry is not to be touched, that is an invitation to the area to turn nuclear within the 10 or 15 coming years.
Okay. I'm going to repeat what we just said because the ramifications for the future seem to me extremely grave, and we've just sort of glanced over it as if it's one more part of the discussion. There is a nuclear arms race in the Middle East today. That's what you're saying.
There will be if Israel does not pull back on its monopoly over nuclear weapons.
And do you really think the Israelis intend to pull back?
If they do not pull back, it will be a nuclear arms race.
What do you think? You've been living in this region all your life.
I don't expect them to pull back on this issue. I don't expect them to pull back, or at least the most they would do is to promise, given certain conditions, that they would eventually consider the issue later on, and this is not satisfactory for them.
I mean, it's a little bit like the peace. The Israelis call what we have now peace. As you point out, it's surrender, it's not peace. People understand it's not peace. The Israelis say that they will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the region, but we all know they have nuclear weapons. We all know from published reports that they have hundreds of nuclear weapons.
Yes, of course. But no, they have. But what I want to say is it has become very difficult today to indefinitely keep out of the region a nuclear build-up if one state believes that it can keep its monopoly over these weapons.
And are you suggesting, even though you haven't said, that even moderate pro-American states, pro-peace process states like Saudi Arabia and Egypt will be propelled in the direction of weapons of mass destruction?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is frightening, you realize what you're saying.
I know. I don't think that anybody will accept Israel alone to have nuclear weapons in this area ever.
Because the emotions of this region are not like the Cold War when the Cold War took place, there were two centers of authority. And the couple of times we got close to a nuclear war, those centers of authority pulled back. Yes. The passions of this part of the world with competing centers of authority and competing emotions.
The threat is there.
The threat is...
That's what you're talking about.
Well, that's what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. No, what I'm saying, I'm saying as I see it. I mean, put all together, it will begin today by Israel having the nuclear weaponry and the Arabs not having. Then there will be signs that Israel cannot see peace. Today, what Israel and America are saying, there cannot be peace and terrorism. Tomorrow it will be, we cannot have peace and military regimes in the Arab world, or regimes issued out of the military in the Arab world. So that will be antagonizing many parties who so far are ready even to make a peace deal with Israel. Then lower down the road, we'll have one party nuclear and others not. All these factors can only contribute to create a situation where the rules of the game as they are presented now in the name of peace have no future.
Among your circle of friends, journalists, intellectuals, how many in the 17 years since the peace between Egypt and Israel have been to Israel?
The only type of people who would go in the professionals are people who would go for very specific professional reasons and very limited. Nobody would go on his own. Nobody would want to go on his own. This might apply to certain business communities. And it seems that recently there has been more business people going to Israel than before.
But this is the way the intellectual class expresses its sense of we've been had.
In a way. I mean, there is the feeling that so far, one way to say not to go to Israel is to say we don't see why our behavior with Israel should change. What has happened so far does not encourage us to see what we have been promised, exactly what you're saying, what we have promised coming into being. It's not being implemented.
Well, Mohammed, it is always extremely illuminating and insightful and it always challenges one's sense of what has happened and what will happen to talk to you. Thank you for agreeing to be on the program. Thank you for sitting with me this afternoon. I'm Mark Bruzonsky. I'm the host of this program, Mideast Realities. Please tune in next week on this channel, same day of the week, same time, for another episode of Mideast Realities.